The Saturday morning crowd at Hemingway's department store moved with a slow, predictable rhythm. Sunlight poured through the high glass ceiling of the atrium, catching dust motes dancing in the air. The sound was a low hum of shuffling feet, the rustle of shopping bags, and the distant ping of the elevator. For years, the heart of this atrium had been the grand piano, a sleek, ebony beast that sat on a small, polished stage like a sleeping king. And for 3 of those years, the man who woke the king every Saturday was Arthur. Arthur was in his late 60s, a man whose posture still carried a ghost of the discipline from his conservatory days, though now it was tempered by a constant low ache in his lower back. His hair, a fine silver, was combed with meticulous care. His hands, resting on his knees as he sat waiting for his shift to start, were long-fingered and veined, but still strong. They were a pianist's hands, even if they felt a little stiff these mornings. He watched the people drift by. A young couple argued quietly over towels. An elderly woman tested the cushion of a display sofa. No one looked at the piano. No one looked at him. He was part of the furniture, a machine that produced pleasant noise. That was fine. It was easier that way. With a small sigh, he lifted the fallboard, revealing the row of white and black teeth. He placed his hands on the keys, cool and familiar. He didn't choose a piece. His fingers simply began to play. They settled into a medley from the sound of music, the notes precise, the tempo perfect. It was music without risk, without feeling. He played the notes on the page in his mind, but his own mind was elsewhere. It was on the stiffness in his knuckles. It was on the lukewarm cup of tea he'd had for breakfast. It was on the quiet emptiness of his apartment that awaited him after his 4-hour shift. The music was a wall between him and the store. He built it note by note, out across the atrium. Near the escalators leading to children's wear, a boy stood very still. He was 10, small for his age, with dark, thoughtful eyes that missed very little. His name was Malik. His mother, Janice, held his hand loosely, her own brow furrowed as she checked a list. They were here for school uniforms, navy blue pants, white polo shirts. It was a necessary trip, but not a fun one. The pants would be too long and need hemming, and she'd have to buy them big so he could grow into them. Malik wasn't thinking about pants. The familiar opening of My Favorite Things washed over him, but he didn't hear the melody. He heard the mechanics. He heard the clean transition from one chord to the next. His eyes were locked on Arthur's hands. They moved like separate creatures, yet they were completely in sync. The way the left hand leaped down to a low note, while the right hand danced up high. The way the fingers curved, just so, to press a key without striking it. He had a keyboard at home. Well, not at his home, at his grandma's apartment. It was a small plastic thing with thin keys that sometimes stuck. He'd taught himself bits of songs from the hymns his grandma played at church, and from videos he watched on her old tablet, his fingers mimicking the shapes he saw. But this was a living thing. The piano was so big, so shiny. It seemed to swallow the light and the sound, and then give it back, richer and deeper. Janice finished her list. Okay, baby, let's go upstairs. They should have your size in the polo shirts. Malik didn't move. Mama, he whispered, his voice almost lost under Arthur's playing. Look, I see it, honey. It's a nice piano. She gave his hand a gentle tug. Come on. But listen, Malik said. Janice paused. She listened. She heard pleasant department store music. She saw a tired-looking older man playing it. She saw her son's face, which was alight with something she didn't often see during these practical errands. It was pure, unguarded wonder. Malik, she said softly, a warning and a reassurance in her tone. We can't bother the man. He's working. I just want to see, Malik murmured. Not taking his eyes off the dance of fingers on ivory, Arthur finished the medley and moved seamlessly into Edelweiss. The pace was slower, more somber. He glanced at the tip jar on the piano's edge. A few dollar bills and some coins. It was always slow before lunch. He allowed himself a small, private grimace as a twinge shot through his right wrist. He played through it. The music was a shield, but today it felt heavy to carry. He saw the boy from the corner of his eye. A small, dark shape standing statue still. Another kid who'll want to come bang on the keys, he thought with a familiar resignation. He'd have to shoo them away politely. It was part of the unspoken job description. * Provide ambience. Do not let children molest the instrument. * Malik took a half step forward. The pull was physical, like a magnet in his chest. He could almost feel the cool smoothness of the keys under his own fingertips. He imagined what it would be like to press one and hear that big, room-filling sound come from him, not from across the room. Janice saw his longing. Her heart squeezed. She knew that look. It was the look he got when he was completely absorbed in the music on the radio, when he would tap out rhythms on the kitchen table with a complexity that startled her. She felt a pang of guilt. She couldn't give him lessons. The keyboard from the thrift store was the best she could do. The world of grand pianos and men in suits who gave concerts was a world away from their reality of budget, lists, and careful planning. Arthur played the final, lingering note of Edelweiss. The sound faded into the hum of the store. He placed his hands in his lap for a moment, stretching his fingers. Break time. He stood up, the joints in his knees popping softly. He'd get a drink of water, maybe step outside for a breath of air that wasn't recycled and scented with perfume. As he walked away from the piano, he left a vacuum. The sleeping king was silent again. For Moik, the silence was louder than the music. The bench was empty. The beautiful, forbidden thing was just sitting there, unattended. The distance between him and the stage seemed to shrink. It was just a few steps. A few steps across polished floor, up 2 small steps, and he would be there. He looked up at his mother. Her face was kind but tired, already thinking of the next chore. He looked at the retreating back of the pianist, who was now at the water fountain with his back turned. It was a now or never moment. The kind that arrives without fanfare. He slipped his hand from his mother's. Malik, she started, but he was already moving. Not running, but walking with a purpose that belied his small size. He reached the stage, climbed the 2 steps, and stood before the piano. He didn't touch it. He just stared at the endless row of keys, the black ones like gaps in a white fence. Up close, it was even more magnificent and terrifying. Janice hurried over, her shoes clicking on the floor. Baby, no. We can't. Arthur, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief, turned around. He saw the boy at the piano. He saw the mother approaching, flustered. Here we go, he thought, the familiar script running through his mind. Smile, be firm. Say it's a very expensive instrument. He walked back, his polite, professional mask settling into place. He was about to speak when the boy turned to look at him. The boy's eyes weren't mischievous or demanding. They were huge, solemn, and filled with a question so deep it stopped Arthur's prepared words in his throat. The boy wasn't looking at him as a guard or an obstacle. He was looking at him as a gatekeeper to a magical land. Malik's heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. The pianist was right there, tall and imposing. His mother was at the edge of the stage, her eyes pleading with him to come down. Everything in him wanted to run back to her, but a stronger force held him there. He looked from the man's face to the open keys and back again. He took a tiny breath, the biggest one he could manage. His voice, when it came out, was clear as a bell in the quiet atrium. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a plea. It was just a simple, honest question, loaded with all the hope in his small world. "Excuse me, sir," Malik said. "Can I try?" The words hung in the air between them, delicate as a soap bubble. "Can I try?" Arthur blinked. He'd heard the question 100 times before. Usually it was a shout, followed by a child barreling toward the keyboard with grabby hands. This was different. The boy hadn't touched a single key. He just stood there, waiting for permission, his whole small body tense with wanting. For a second, Arthur just looked at him. He saw the cheap sneakers, a little scuffed at the toes. He saw the careful neatness of the boy's second-hand jacket. He saw the mother, frozen a few feet away, her face a mix of apology and dread. She was already shaking her head slightly, mouthing "I'm so sorry" to Arthur. This was a scene she'd played out before, he guessed. The gentle pulling away from things they couldn't have. The old script was right there. Asterisk, "I'm sorry, son. It's a very delicate instrument." Store policy. Asterisk. He could say it and be done. He could go back to his bench, play his medleys, and clock out. No fuss. But the boy's eyes wouldn't let him. They weren't begging. They were just asking. Honestly, there was a quiet intelligence in them that reminded Arthur, strangely, of his own younger self, peering into the practice rooms at the conservatory, listening for secrets. He let out a slow breath, one he didn't know he'd been holding. The professional mask softened, just a crack. "1 minute," Arthur heard himself say. His voice came out gruffer than he meant it to. He cleared his throat. 1 minute and gentle hands. "These keys aren't for banging." The boy's face transformed. It was like someone had switched on a light inside him. A wide, brilliant smile broke through the solemnity, so bright it was almost startling. He nodded vigorously, a quick up-and-down motion. "Yes, sir, gentle, I promise." The mother, Janice, stepped closer, her hand outstretched as if to pull him back. "Oh, sir, you don't have to. He gets carried away." Arthur gave her a small, tired wave. "It's all right." 1 minute. He was already regretting it a little. A minute of chaotic noise would be a fair price to pay to make the boy go away and restore the orderly silence of his. Saturday. Malik didn't need to be told twice. He turned to the piano bench, which was too high for him. He put both hands on the polished wood and hoisted himself up, swinging his legs. His feet dangled, a good 6 inches from the floor. He sat perfectly straight, just like he'd seen in the videos. He wiped his hands nervously on his pants, then held them up, curved, over the keys. He looked so small against the vast, dark body of the grand piano, like a little bird who had landed on the back of a sleeping bear. Arthur folded his arms, taking a half-step back. He prepared for the worst. A fistful of keys slammed at random, a loud, discordant crash that would make shoppers jump. He saw the mother brace herself too, her eyes squeezed shut for a second. Malik lowered his hands. His right thumb and little finger found 2 notes, far apart. He pressed them softly. A low, mellow sound and a high, clear sound rang out together, blending into something that was neither happy nor sad, but deep. It was a testing touch, a greeting, not a bang. Arthur's eyebrows lifted a fraction. There was control there. Intent. Then the boy closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, his small shoulders rising and falling. When he opened them again, he wasn't looking at the keys. He was looking at something inside himself. His expression settled into one of fierce, quiet concentration. His left hand moved first, planting a solid, low chord that vibrated in the wood of the piano. It was a serious sound, a solemn sound. Before it faded, his right hand began to move. The notes that came out were not the simple, blocky chords of a beginner. They were a flowing, liquid line of melody, one note spilling into the next. It was slow, and it was filled with a yearning so palpable it seemed to change the air in the atrium. Arthur's arms unfolded. He stood up straighter, the ache in his back forgotten. He knew this piece. Of course, he knew it. It was Chopin. Nocturne in C-sharp minor. It wasn't the flashiest piece, but it was a deep pool of emotion. It was all about shading, about touch, about making the piano sing, not just speak. It was a piece for poets, not mechanics. And this child in a department store, was playing it not just playing the notes. He was feeling them. His left hand provided a steady, heartbeat-like pulse, while his right hand wove the melancholy melody above it. The dynamics shifted. A phrase would start almost as a whisper, then swell with a gentle pain, then fade back into quiet. The boy's fingers, small as they were, had a surprising strength. They knew when to press and when to glide. He even used the sustain pedal, his small foot stretching down to tap it at the right moments, connecting the notes into those long, sighing phrases that were the soul of the piece. Janice's hands had flown to her mouth. Tears, hot and sudden, filled her eyes. She knew her son loved music. She heard him pick out tunes on the plastic keyboard. She heard him hum complex harmonies along with the radio. But this was a stranger. This was a language she didn't know he was fluent in. The music was beautiful, but it was a beauty that hurt. It sounded like longing. It sounded like a dream too big for their small apartment. She watched his small, serious profile, completely lost in another world, and a love so fierce it stole her breath wrapped around her heart. A woman pushing a stroller had stopped dead. She didn't move. A store clerk restocking scarves put down her box. Two teenagers, glued to their phones, looked up, their thumbs still. The slow Saturday hum of the store died away, piece by piece, replaced by this single, stunning stream of sound. Arthur felt a lump form in his throat. He listened, not as a performer, but as a listener for the first time in years. He heard no hesitation. He heard the ghost of mistakes that had been practiced away 1,000 times on an inferior keyboard. He heard a natural, instinctive understanding of rubato, that slight pushing and pulling of time that gives music its human breath. This wasn't learned from a YouTube tutorial. Not really. This was felt. This was innate. He looked at the boy's face. There was no showing off, no awareness of the growing audience. There was only the music, a slight frown of focus between his brows, a soft parting of his lips. His whole being was poured into the act of creation. The piece built to its sorrowful climax, a cascade of notes tumbling like tears before falling back to a resigned, quiet resolution. The final chords were played so softly they were almost just a thought, a memory of sound. The boy held the last note with the pedal, letting it shimmer and fade into absolute silence. He lifted his hands and placed them gently back in his lap. He was breathing a little faster. He blinked, as if waking up from a deep sleep, and slowly became aware of the store again. He turned his head and saw his mother, saw the tears on her cheeks. A flicker of worry crossed his face. "Mama?" That single word broke the spell, but instead of noise rushing back in, the silence held for a second longer. It was a thick, respectful silence. Then a soft clap started from the woman with the stroller. Another person joined in. Then a few more. It wasn't wild applause. It was stunned, appreciative acknowledgement. The two teenagers were actually filming on their phones. Malek's cheeks flushed a deep red. He looked down at his knees, suddenly unbearably shy. The giant who had been playing a moment ago was gone, replaced by a flustered little boy on a bench too big for him. Arthur hadn't clapped. He hadn't moved. He stood there, staring at the space between the boy's small back and the piano. The professional in his mind was cataloging the technical achievements, the clean fingering, the controlled dynamics, the emotional maturity. But the man, the tired, lonely man who played background music for tips, felt something else entirely. He felt the walls he'd built around himself, the walls of routine and disappointment, crack wide open. He felt a shock of pure, unadulterated joy, followed immediately by a crushing wave of humility. This child, in 1 minute, had communicated more honest feeling through that piano than Arthur had in the last 3 years. The silence from Arthur was the loudest sound in the atrium. He tried to speak. The usual pleasantries. Very nice. How long have you been playing? Stuck in his throat like dry stones. They were meaningless. Insulting, even. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just looked at the boy, then at the mother, his own eyes shining with an emotion he couldn't name. The king was no longer sleeping, and the man who was supposed to be its keeper had just been reminded what its true voice sounded like. The applause faded into a soft murmur of voices. People were whispering, pointing gently. A few phones were still held up, but the moment had passed from a performance back into a regular Saturday. The crowd began to drift away, back to towels and sales racks, but their steps were slower. Their glances lingering on the small boy on the stage. Malik felt the heat in his cheeks. The silence after the music had been big and important, but this new attention was itchy and uncomfortable. He wanted to disappear into the bench. He slid off, his shoes making a soft scuff on the floor, and hurried to his mother's side, pressing himself against her leg. The giant who had played the piano was now just a man looking at him, and the man hadn't said anything. Was he angry? Had he broken the rule? Janice wrapped an arm around her son's shoulders, pulling him close. She was still trembling inside, her heart a wild bird in her chest. The tears on her face were drying, leaving cool tracks. She didn't know what to do. Should she thank the man? Apologize again? Her son had just done something magical, but she felt a flicker of fear. In her experience, extraordinary things often came with trouble or questions she couldn't answer. Malik, she whispered, her voice thick. Baby, that was. She couldn't find the word. Arthur finally moved. It was just a step forward, but it broke his stillness. He wasn't looking at the boy anymore. He was looking at the mother. He saw the protectiveness in her stance, the wariness in her eyes. He saw the simple, worn fabric of her coat. He understood silence. He understood worlds that didn't overlap with grand pianos. He cleared his throat, and the sound was rough, like gravel. He had to try twice before his voice worked. Who? He started, then stopped. He tried again, aiming for a gentler tone. Who is teaching him? Janice blinked, surprised by the question. She shook her head slightly. No one, sir. I mean, not really. She smoothed the hand over Malik's hair, a nervous gesture. His grandmother. She plays at their church, piano and organ. She showed him some chords when he was real small. Mostly, he picks it up. She gestured vaguely. He watches those videos online, listens to things. He's always been like that with sounds. Arthur nodded slowly, as if each piece of information was a heavy weight he had to settle into place. No formal lessons. A church pianist grandmother. Videos. A natural ear. It was the oldest story in music, and yet, seeing it here, in the fluorescent light of Hemingway's, it felt like a miracle. It also felt like a crime. He looked down at Malik, who was peeking out from behind his mother's arm. The Chopin, Arthur said. His voice was softer now. The piece you played, how did you learn it? Malik's voice was a tiny mumble into his mother's coat. On my grandma's tablet. There was a man playing it. I liked the way it sounded. Like a story without words. And you learned it by watching? Malik nodded. And listening. Lots of times. I practiced the hard parts on my keyboard. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting Arthur's. There was a flash of worry there. My keyboard at home doesn't have all the keys. Some of the black ones stick. I had to imagine the rest sometimes. Imagine the rest. The phrase hit Arthur square in the chest. This child had been piecing together a masterpiece from fragments, filling in the blanks with his mind. The stiff, silent keys on a cheap keyboard had been no match for the music inside him. A well-dressed store manager had appeared at the edge of the crowd, a polite, concerned smile on his face. He was about to speak, probably to usher them along and restore the store's calm atmosphere. Arthur saw him and held up a single finger. Just a second. It was a small gesture, but it carried an authority that made the manager pause and nod. Stepping back, Arthur turned back to the piano. He walked over to it, not to sit, but to the small shelf where he kept his sheet music. It was mostly for show. He rarely needed it. From a small, leather-bound folder, he pulled out a single business card. It was plain, cream-colored, with faded blue lettering. It didn't say much. Just his name, Arthur Green, and a telephone number. No title, no fancy logos. He hadn't given one out in years. He walked back to Janice and Malik. He didn't hand it to the boy. He held it out to the mother. "I give lessons," he said. The words felt strange in his mouth. He hadn't taught a private student in over a decade. The last ones had been bored children of rich parents, forced to practice. "I have a studio. An old upright, but it's in tune." Janice stared at the card as if it were a live snake. Her mind raced. Lessons meant money. Money they didn't have. It meant schedules, expectations, a commitment she wasn't sure she could make. The kindness in the man's eyes was terrifying because it felt real, and real things could be taken away. "Oh, sir, that's so kind. But we couldn't possibly." Arthur anticipated this. He saw the calculations flicker behind her eyes. He lowered his voice so only she and Malik could hear. "No charge," he said, plain and simple. Janice's mouth fell open. She couldn't process it. Nothing in life was free. There was always a catch. Why? You don't even know us." Arthur looked at Malik again. The boy was watching the exchange, his brow furrowed, understanding that something important was happening, but not quite what. "I know what I just heard," Arthur said quietly. That is a gift. It doesn't belong just to him. It belongs to anyone who gets to hear it." A gift like that? He searched for the right words, words that weren't sentimental but true. It has a right to be answered. It needs guidance. Not to change it, he added quickly, seeing the mother's protective flare. To help it find its way out properly. He finally knelt down. It was a stiff, painful movement, and his knees protested loudly. But he wanted to be on the boy's level. He held the card out, now offering it directly to Malik. "You have work to do?" Arthur said to him, his tone suddenly that of a teacher speaking to a serious student, not a man to a child. "What you did was beautiful, but it's just the beginning. There are worlds in there," he nodded toward the piano, "that you haven't even dreamed of yet. I can show you the maps." Malik looked from the card to the man's face. He saw no pity. He saw no condescending, "Isn't he cute?" smile. He saw a deep, serious respect. He saw a challenge. He carefully took the card. It felt thick and important in his small fingers. "What about your piano here?" Malik asked, his practical mind working. "Can I come here and practice?" Arthur almost laughed, a short, breathy sound. He stood up, groaning softly. "This old thing? It's for making shopping feel fancy." The real work happens somewhere quieter. My piano has coffee stains on the bench and books piled all around it. It's a working piano. He looked at Janice. The offer is real. Talk to his grandmother. Think about it. The number is there. Janice finally found her voice. The word free was still echoing, but the man's sincerity was chipping away at her disbelief. Thank you, she said, her words heartfelt and heavy. Thank you so much. We'll talk about it. Arthur gave one last, slow nod. His job here was done. More than done. He had a 4-hour shift to finish, playing background music that now felt emptier than ever. But for the first time in a long time, the thought of the rest of his Saturday didn't fill him with a dull heaviness. It felt like an intermission. He watched as the mother gently steered her son away from the piano, her hand on his back. The boy looked back once, over his shoulder, the business card clutched tightly in his hand. Arthur raised his hand in a small, faint wave. Then he turned, lowered himself onto the piano bench with a sigh, and faced the keys. He didn't play the sound of music. His hands, almost of their own accord, found the opening notes of the Chopin Nocturne. The same one. But under his fingers, it sounded different. It wasn't worse. It was just older. Wiser perhaps, but tired. He played it for a few bars, then let his hands fall still. He sat in the quiet of the emptying atrium, not as a performer, but as a man who had just remembered what he was supposed to be listening for. The king was awake, and for the first time in years, the keeper felt a reason to keep watch. The walk through the store was a blur of bright lights and soft music that Malik didn't hear. His whole world had shrunk to the small rectangle of cardstock in his hand. He could feel the raised letters of the man's name under his thumb. His mother's hand was tight on his shoulder, steering him automatically towards the escalators. But her mind was a million miles away. They got to the children's section. Janice picked up a pair of navy pants, checked the size, held them against Malik's waist. It was all muscle memory. Her eyes kept drifting to her son's face, to the card, and back to the price tag on the pants. The numbers seemed to swim. He said free, she murmured, more to herself than to him. Malik looked up. Is it a trick? The question, so blunt and honest, cut through her fog. She knelt right there between the racks of clothes, ignoring the other shoppers. I don't think so, baby. Some people are just good. Your grandma is like that. But even as she said it, doubt whispered. The world wasn't full of grandmas. It was full of people who wanted something. He called it a gift, Malik said, repeating the man's word. It felt better than talent. A talent was something you had. A gift felt like something you were given, to take care of. It is, Janice said, her voice firming with conviction. She touched his cheek. What you did back there. Mama didn't know. I'm sorry I didn't know. He shrugged, shy again. It's just the piano. It's easier than the little one. The sound? It helps you find the right notes. The sound helps you find the right notes. Janice stored that away, another piece of her son she was just discovering. She stood up, taking the pants. We'll talk to Grandma. We'll call the number. We'll just see. That night, in his grandmother's cramped living room, the card sat in the middle of the coffee table like a sacred object. The small, sticky keyboard was pushed to the side. Grandma had listened to the story twice, her hands clasped under her chin. She had asked Malik to play the Chopin piece on her keyboard, and he did, and she had closed her eyes and nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a line down her wrinkled cheek. She knew what she was hearing. She knew the difference between playing notes and making music. Arthur Green, Grandma said, reading the name aloud. She looked at Janice. You think he's for real? He seemed for real. He looked, Shaken Up, by Malik. Grandma nodded. She understood that, too. Sometimes the spirit moved, and it was humbling to be nearby when it did. A gift needs a guide, she said, echoing the pianist's words almost exactly. I can show him the hymns, the old ways. But this classical music, this Chopin, that's a whole other country. He needs a map. So 2 days later, with her heart pounding against her ribs, Janice made the call. Arthur's voice on the phone was calm, quiet. He gave her an address across town, a day and a time. Saturday afternoon, after his shift at the store. Just come, he said. See the place. See if it feels right. No promises needed. The address led them to an older part of the city, with tall, narrow houses pressed close together. Arthur's house was at the end of a row, a brick building with a faded blue door. There was no sign, no studio plaque. It just looked like a house. Janice held Malik's hand tightly as they climbed the steps. Before she could knock, the door opened. Arthur looked different. Out of his neat department store clothes, he wore a worn brown sweater with a small hole near the elbow and soft corduroy pants. He looked more real, and somehow softer. He smiled, a small, tentative thing. You came, he said, as if he'd been half expecting them not to. He ushered them in. The front hallway was dark, crowded with bookshelves that overflowed not just with books, but with stacks of sheet music, old records, and bits of paper. It smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and faintly of coffee. It was the opposite of the shiny, empty atrium. Through here, Arthur said, leading them into the front room. And there it was. It wasn't a grand piano. It was an upright, a tall, boxy thing made of dark wood that was scratched and nicked in places. The bench was indeed stained, with a faded cushion. Music was piled on top of it, on the floor around it, on a nearby stand. A single lamp with a green glass shade cast a warm pool of light over the keys. This was not a piano for performing. This was a piano for thinking. For working, Malik drifted toward it like a compass needle finding north. He didn't touch it. He just looked. Go ahead, Arthur said, reading his silence. It's friendlier than it looks. Malik sat on the edge of the bench. He touched a single key. Middle C, the note filled the small, cluttered room. It was a warm sound, round and alive, with a little buzz of character that the perfect, clinical piano in the store didn't have. He played a simple scale, up and down. His fingers, which had been so sure on the grand, now seemed hesitant, exploring this new voice. It's got a cold, Malik said, surprising himself. Arthur let out a genuine laugh. Yes, it does. The D-flat above middle C sticks a little in the damp weather. It has personality. You have to get to know it. Janice stood by the door, watching this exchange. The formality of the store was gone. This was two people talking about a common friend. Arthur pulled up a wooden chair and sat it near the bench, not too close. Your grandmother tells me you play by ear, mostly. That you watch and listen. Malik nodded, his hands resting in his lap. That's a powerful way to learn, Arthur said. But it's like having a huge, beautiful forest in your head with no paths. You can get anywhere, but you might get lost, or you might never find the most secret, beautiful clearings. He reached over and took a thick book from the pile. He opened it to a page dense with lines and dots. This is a map. This is how the people who wrote the music thought it should go. The notes, the rhythm, the fingers to use. It's not a prison. It's a starting point. A trailhead. He put the sheet music on the stand. It was something simple. A short piece by a composer named Barduk, based on a folk tune. It was rhythmic, strange, and playful. This, Arthur said, is not Chopin. This is from somewhere else. Try the first line. Just try to read it. Don't worry about how it sounds. For the next 20 minutes, Arthur guided Malik through the very basics of reading notation. He was a patient teacher, his voice steady. He didn't praise unnecessarily, but he nodded when Malik understood something. Good, now you see the pattern. When Malik's fingers fumbled, he simply said, "Again, slower, the speed will come." Janice watched her son struggle. This was hard, boring work compared to the flight of fancy in the store. She saw the frustration pinch his brow. But she also saw he didn't give up. He kept trying, his tongue poking out in concentration. Finally, after many false starts, Malek played the first line of the Bartok piece. It was slow, halting, full of wrong notes that he corrected. It didn't sound like music. It sounded like a puzzle being solved. When he finished, he let out a big breath, disappointed. Arthur was smiling. Exactly. Malik looked at him, confused. You just learned something new, Arthur said. You built a new path. Now, he took the music away. Play it for me by ear. Just what you remember. Malik closed his eyes. He played the line again. This time, it was fluid. It swung. He added a little emphasis Arthur hadn't shown him. It sounded like music. Arthur's smile widened. Now you have both, the map and the forest. You see? Malik saw. A slow, understanding smile spread across his own face. This wasn't magic. This was work. But it was work that made the magic bigger, that the lesson ended soon after. Arthur gave Malik a single sheet of paper with some simple exercises. For next time, he said, as if there was no question there would be a next time. At the door, Janice found her voice. Thank you, Mr. Green. Really, what do we owe you? Arthur shook his head. He looked past her, to where Malik was carefully folding the sheet music into his coat pocket. You don't owe me money. What I get? He paused, choosing his words carefully. For years, I've been talking to myself in that store. Today, I had a conversation. That's payment enough for now. He looked at Janice, his old eyes serious. Bring him back next Saturday. And tell him to listen to the radio. Not just for the tunes. Listen for the spaces between the notes. That's where the music breathes. Walking back to the bus stop, the winter air cold on their faces, Janice felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about seeing a door open for her son and seeing a good man on the other side, holding a lamp. Malik walked beside her, silent, his hand in hers. He wasn't thinking about being a prodigy. He was thinking about the sticky D-flat key and the map in his pocket and the vast, uncharted forest waiting in his mind. For the first time, he had a guide. And for the first time in a long time, Arthur Green had someone to guide. The Saturday lessons became the anchor of their weeks. Malik's grandmother would take him on the bus, sitting with the carefully folded sheet music in her lap like a treasure map. The worn blue door of Arthur's house became a familiar sight, a portal to a different world. Inside, the clutter of the front room started to make sense to Malik. The piles of music were like layers of soil, each holding fossils of different times and places. Arthur would dig through them, pulling out something for each lesson. A lively dance by Bach, a haunting snippet of blues, a stormy sonata by Beethoven. This one, Arthur would say, placing it on the stand, is angry at the world. Listen. And Malik would listen, not just with his ears, but with his bones. Before his fingers even touched the keys. It wasn't always easy. Arthur was a kind man, but he was a serious teacher. He didn't want a parrot. He wanted a thinker. Why did you slow down there? Arthur would ask, stopping Malik mid-phrase. It felt sad there, Malik would mumble. Okay, Arthur would say. But is it your sadness, or is it in the music? See this marking? It says dolenti. It means sorrowful. The composer put it there. You found it? Good. Now, don't just feel it. Mean it. Play it like you're telling me why. Malik learned to argue at the page, to have a conversation with the long-dead composer through his fingers. He learned that the sticky D-flat key on Arthur's upright required a firmer touch, a little nudge of encouragement. He learned that Arthur's old kettle whistled exactly a B-flat when the water was ready for tea, and that Arthur would hum along as he poured Dot one afternoon. About 3 months in, Arthur didn't give Malik any new music. Instead, he sat beside him on the bench, which was a rare thing. He looked tired, but a good tired. You remember the piece you played that first day? Arthur asked. Malik nodded. The Chopin. He hadn't played it since. Play it now. Malik felt a flutter of nerves. That piece belonged to the magic of the store, to the stunned silence. It felt private, but he placed his hands on the keys of the old upright, took a breath, and began Dot. It was different. The notes were the same, but the story had changed. Before, it had been a beautiful, lonely dream. Now, it had shape. He understood the architecture of the sadness. He knew where the tension built, where the release was supposed to be, where the melody yearned for resolution. He played it with control, with understanding. It was less like a cry, and more like a story told by someone who has lived through it. When he finished, Arthur was quiet for a long time. He just stared at the piano's faded name, etched in the wood. You fixed it, Arthur said finally, his voice rough. Malik looked at him, confused. Fixed it? The first time, Arthur said, it was perfect in its way. But it was floating, untethered. Now it has roots. You gave it roots. He placed a hand on Malik's shoulder, a light, brief touch. That's the work. That's what the maps are for. Not to take the magic away, to give it a place to live. He got up and went to a small, locked cabinet Malik had always wondered about. Arthur fumbled with a key, opened it, and took out a few sheets of music, handwritten and fragile. My teacher gave this to me, he said. It's not published. It's just a piece. I want you to learn it. It was the greatest act of trust Malik had ever been shown. Meanwhile, at home, the music began to spill out of the lessons. Malik would practice his exercises on his grandmother's keyboard, the tinny sound filling the small apartment. He started to pick out the harmonies of the songs on the radio, explaining to his mother, Hear that? The cello is doing this underneath. Janice, who had never thought much about music, began to hear the world differently. She heard the rhythm in the dripping faucet, the melody in a bird's call outside the window. Her son was teaching her to listen. One Saturday, Arthur wasn't at the door to greet them. His car was outside, but the house was silent. Malik's grandmother knocked, concern on her face. After a moment, they heard slow footsteps. Arthur opened the door, looking pale. A bad cold, he said. His voice was a whisper. He shouldn't have answered the door. We'll come back next week, grandmother said firmly, but Arthur's eyes went to Malik. No, he croaked. The boy came all this way. The piano's lonely. Go in. Work on the second page of that piece I gave you. The left hand is tricky. I'll be upstairs. Hesitantly, Malik went to the piano. He played softly, conscious of Arthur being sit upstairs. He worked through the difficult passage, a complex weaving of notes that sounded like a conversation between two voices. He struggled with it for half an hour, the house silent except for his playing, and the distant sound of Arthur coughing out suddenly. From upstairs, Arthur's voice, weak but clear, called down. No, the F-sharp is a passing tone. It's lighter. Don't land on it, just Brush it. Malik stopped, startled. Then he smiled. He tried it again, brushing the F sharp, making it fleeting. Better. The voice croaked from above. Malik's single quotes. His grandmother, sitting in the armchair, shook her head and smiled. Even flat on his back, the old teacher was teaching. The seasons turned. A year passed since that first day in the store. Malik grew an inch. His hands stretched, could reach an octave more comfortably. The pieces grew more complex, the maps more detailed. Arthur, too, seemed to change. The perpetual tiredness in his eyes from the store began to be replaced by a different look, a sharp, interested light when Malik tackled a new challenge. He started playing again for himself, not just for the shoppers. Old, forgotten pieces came back to his fingers. He'd play them for Malik at the end of a lesson. "This is what I was working on when I was your age," he'd say, and the music would be full of a young man's fire and hope. The department store manager eventually retired. The new manager, a young woman with ideas about modern ambience, decided the grand piano took up too much valuable retail space. Arthur was given a generous severance and a thank you card. His last Saturday at Hemingway's was unannounced. He played his usual set, but for his final piece, he didn't play a show tune. He played the first few gentle phrases of the Chopin Nocturne. Then he stopped, stood up, and closed the lid for the last time. He didn't look back. That afternoon, at the lesson, he told Malik the news. "So, I'm a free man," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "What will you do?" Malik asked, worried for his teacher. Arthur looked around his cluttered, music-filled house. He looked at the boy on his bench. "I think," he said, "I'll have more time to teach. If my student is willing." Malik just grinned. A few weeks later, Arthur had a small gathering. Just Malik, his mother, his grandmother, and a few of Arthur's old friends from his conservatory days, a retired violinist and a music professor. It was in his living room. There were cookies and lemonade. "Malik has something to play," Arthur announced, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Malik, his heart thumping, sat at the old upright. He wasn't playing for a crowd of strangers anymore. He was playing for people who mattered. He played the handwritten piece Arthur had given him, the one from the locked cabinet. It was beautiful and complicated, full of light and shadow. He played it not just with roots, but with wings. When he finished, the small room was quiet, then filled with warm, genuine applause. The old violinist wiped his eyes. The professor nodded slowly at Arthur, a look of deep respect passing between them. After the others had left, Arthur handed Malik a small wrapped package. Inside was a metronome, an old-fashioned wind-up one with a wooden case. "It's for when I'm not here to keep time for you," Arthur said. Then he added, his tone casual, "and the piano. The upright. In my will, it's for you. So you'll always have a good one to practice on." Janice gasped. Malik stared at the old instrument, seeing it not as a scratched, bulky thing, but as a living history, a companion. He couldn't speak. Arthur waved his hand, as if shooing away a fly. "It's just furniture. The music is what matters. The music you found, and the music you've still got to find." He looked at Malik, his teacher's gaze firm and loving. "Now, the bardic we started last week. The second movement. Let's go. And this time, remember the spaces. The music needs to breathe." Malik took his place on the stained bench. He placed his hands on the keys, on the piano that was now, in a way, already his. He nodded at his teacher, and he began to play. The notes filled the house, a sound that was no longer a question, but an answer, and a promise of questions yet to come.